Hey guys, today we are going to be learning how to analyze a poem using the soapstone strategy. Whenever you use this strategy, it's just going to help you understand the text greater. That way, whenever you're reading, you really understand every part of what's happening. Okay. So the soapstone strategy is an acronym, and each letter does stand for something. So, for example, and I'm looking on the left side here of this paper, this is going to be telling us what each letter is. Okay. So the first S in soapstone stands for subject, and it is just telling us what the piece is about, and it should be stated in just a few words. Okay. The O stands for occasion, and this tells us the time, the place, the date that the text is taking place in, and that does show how significant the piece is. It also can be historical or social occasions. So maybe something that happened a long time ago or something that happened with a big group of people. The A stands for audience, and it is just who the piece is directed to. It can be one or more people, and the audience does affect how or why a writer writes a particular text. The P stands for purpose. I'm just going to scroll down a little. And this is just why the piece was written. It's kind of just the why behind it, right? And then we'll go back to like author's purpose. So this is where we go back and we have to think about PIDE. Remember, we have talked about that before. So we know maybe why the author, if the author is trying to persuade us, inform us, entertain us, or just describe something in this text. And what does the speaker hope to accomplish through the purpose of why they're writing it? The second S stands for speaker, and it is just who is telling the story or giving information. So specifically about, the author. So what do you know about the author's beliefs, traits, or experiences that they may have gone through? And then in fiction, it would be the voice telling the story, but in a nonfiction piece, it would just be the author. And then the last part is just the tone, and it is just what is the attitude of the speaker towards the subject. And then just how do you know? So whenever you're looking at this, when you're evaluating the text, you'll specifically look at the word choices that the author is using, figurative language that the author uses, and if they're using more positive words, then you know maybe that they really like the subject or they agree with it. Whereas maybe they're using negative words or details, similes, stuff like that, then you know that maybe they don't like this subject or they disagree with the text. Okay. So again, that is the acronym soapstone, in which what each one stands for. So now we are going to be we're going to be looking at I'm going to be showing you how to actually use a strategy, reading the poem that's here in the middle called Leaving the Dust Bowl by Bob Bradshaw. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the poem the whole way through, and then we'll just go back and fill in each part of the soapstone strategy, okay? So it says, our house poked between the sand dunes like a half-buried shrimp boat. Sand leaned against the tops of fences. We turned our plates on the dinner table upside down and covered the baby's crib with a wet sheet at night to keep her from breathing grit. Dust pneumonia was as common as rash and bankrupt farms. It's time to leave, Mother, I said. We gave our land to the bank. We gave our mule to Jordan, who took on the burden of trying to feed it. Don't worry, Mother. California is like a big green harbor waiting for us. Mother nodded. We tied on the beds and furniture and cooking pans and threw in the kids out of the sentimental reasons and pointed the car west. So that is the poem that we are going to be analyzing using the soapstone strategy. So we're going to go back and we're going to, again, fill in these since we know what each one already stands for. And again, if you forgot, remember on the left side, you can always look at this information whenever you're filling in your answer on this side. So for this one, the subject, obviously we know, if I look at the title, it says Leaving the Dust Bowl. So I know that that's probably a good indication of what the subject is going to be about. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to type my answer here. So I know the answer is about leaving the, hold on, I'm going to change my font really quickly so it fits in here. So I know that during the whole subject of the poem, they are talking about trying to leave the Dust Bowl. And I'm going to leave it that way. So I'm moving on to the occasion. Again, I'm going to change this. I don't know why it keeps changing. But the occasion, remember, we are looking at the time, the place, historical, social context. So I know here that looking at, again, they are in the Dust Bowl. So I'm going to put that the place they're in is on a dust farm. So I'm going in here on a dust farm during the Dust Bowl. And I can tell that they're on the farm during the time of the Dust Bowl because they mention like the sand dunes. Like here on this first stanza, they mention that part. They mention sand again, leaning against the tops of fences. And then it mentions about whenever someone's breathing, they're breathing the grit, so breathing the sand, right? So I know that it's during the time of the sand, the Dust Bowl. So I'm moving on to A, which is the audience. Remember, I just want to know who this is directed towards. So it is probably directed towards people with knowledge. Sorry, hold on. I'm going to have to go back and change this. So for the audience, remember, it is just who the piece is directed to. So here I'm putting people with knowledge or experience of the Dust Bowl. So I just know that the anyone who's experienced this has probably experienced all these things that they're talking about, right? So getting, again, the sand maybe in their mouths, or whenever they're eating, turning over their dishes because there's sand everywhere. I'm moving on to the purpose. So why was this piece written? So for the purpose, remember we talked about how author's purpose also falls with this. So like persuade, inform, entertain, describe. So in this one, they are describing a lot of different scenarios that did happen during that time. So I'm going to say to describe an experience. Oops. Describe an experience during the Dust. And again, they're describing a lot of different experiences that they're going through, right? So I know that, again, they mentioned like they're describing like when they're eating, they're turning over their dishes, how it was as common to get a rash because there's always sand in the air. And then they're describing here how they tied everything down, that way they were going to have to leave because they wanted to move out of that area. So that was for purpose. And then we're moving on to the second S, the speaker. So we're trying to figure out here who the author is. So who's writing this piece. And you can tell here that the speaker is probably a child that was living in this area during the Dust Bowl. And I can tell that because it mentions several times. So it mentions up here where it says it's time to leave, mother. So I know there's a child, right? Because they're saying mother, and then don't worry, mother. So that's telling us that a child is writing this poem, right? And they're telling that to the mom, and they're getting ready to leave the Dust Bowl. So here I'm writing a child. Oops, wrong part. Under my speaker, I'm writing a child. The speaker is a child during the times of the Dust Bowl. So the speaker again. And then for tone, so remember that's kind of what the speaker's or the author's attitude towards the subject is. And if I go back, I can tell, remember how I mentioned that you can see like through the figurative language or just the way the author is using his sentences, or he structures them, what the tone is. So if I go back at the poem and I start at the beginning, I can tell at the beginning it is kind of sad, right? It's mentioning that the houses are filled with sand. There's sand in the air, like again with the dishes, turning them over, how it mentions the baby is getting the grit, the sand in the mouth. So I know all of these, the beginning, the first two stanzas, it is kind of sad. It's kind of, it sounds kind of dark, right? So for the tone, I'm just going to put sadness. And I know it changes throughout. So if I keep looking at the rest of it, Again, it's still mentioning the pneumonia, and we know that that's a type of sickness and the rashes, and that's still something negative. So I know here up until the very last stanza, it kind of changes the tone of the tone and the mood of the poem. So they go on to say that they're gonna move, and then the child is saying like, "Don't worry, mom," and then he says like, "California is big and green, and it's waiting for us." So then it kind of changed from sadness and dark to hopefulness. Okay, so I'm also gonna add hopeful. Oops, in the tone box. So I know again that it starts off sad and then it kind of changes throughout, and at the end it ends up hopeful because they're moving away from the Dust Bowl. Okay. So this is an example again of how to use the soapstone strategy whenever you're looking at poems or any kind of text, any literature that you're reading. Again, remember the soapstone is an acronym. Each stands for something. So whenever you're looking at it, you'll just break it up that way. So it'll be easier. That way you're able to understand whatever you're reading deeply.